Hello, and happy marvelous Monday, everybody. I hope that you are well. I'm Karissa Spann, the landlord and tenant expert. I'm super excited that you are joining me today. I am going to dive into and unpack a much needed conversation, going to shed some light on a true story, a disabled man. Um, he lost his Section 8 voucher and may soon be evicted. I know that some of you have a lot of questions regarding this matter. This is a live case. I'm going to get into it. But before I do, I just want to say again, welcome. Thank you so much for tuning in. This segment is all about affordable housing. What does that look like? This information that I'm sharing today is applicable for you, ma'am, or sir, if you are a landlord, if you're thinking about becoming a landlord, and especially participating or renting to tenants who are in some sort of housing subsidy program, such as Section 8. I promise that the information that I share today is not legal advice. However, it is the industry's best tips and practices. So I'm going to give some tips a little later. I'm going to share my contact information in the event that you do want to reach me. My email address, I'm going to share that with you. And certainly, if you have questions, if you have comments, remarks, or observations, please drop it in the chat box. I will respond to them accordingly. Again, I thank you so much for tuning in. I'm live on Facebook, I'm live on LinkedIn, and I am live on YouTube. So if you can hear me okay, before I move forward, let me know that you can hear me okay, if you can see me okay. I want to ask that you just put some hearts or something in the comment section. Let me know that you can hear me okay. I am going to try to work through some technical challenges that we were having a little earlier due to the storm in my area. Nonetheless, I wanted to present this information because I know that some of you have had questions. I received your emails about this matter, and I do want to get straight into it. So again, any comments, any remarks, any observations, please put it in the chat box. Okay. And I promise not to hold you too long, but just long enough to get you this information. And this is what I do each and every Monday at 7:30 p.m. I welcome you to my weekly lives, 7:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, that is. And so again, this is for landlords, this is for tenants, and it's also for a housing professional. And I promise that this segment is meant to be thought-provoking because I want to prepare those of you who are thinking about becoming a landlord in the Section 8 program or a landlord or in any other type of housing subsidy program. But this information doesn't stop there. It is applicable for any type of residential rental property. Okay, and so I'm going to get into the meat, the heart of this situation. It is heartbreaking. It is a really sad story. And I want to try to prevent as many people as possible from going down this rabbit hole. Okay. And so again, comments, remarks, observations, please put in the chat box. All right. So before I get started, I do want to acknowledge, hey, Miss Davis, thank you so much for tuning in. All right. You said that you can hear me loud and clear. Welcome, welcome. Thank you so much for tuning in today. I know that sometimes, especially when we are live and there is some inclement weather, it can temporarily impact our live broadcast. So I'll do my best to try to work through it. And if you're watching the replay, thank you so much. Okay, so let me just get into this. But also, if you find any value in this information that I'm sharing today, please please tag somebody else, and please also share it. I want to get this information out to as many people as possible. Is that okay? And hopefully we could improve and positively impact the rental community. All right, so I'm going to get into it. And so today I am talking about the disabled man who lost his Section 8 voucher and may soon be evicted. But before I do that, I just want to make sure that for those of you who may not be a landlord, or maybe you are thinking about becoming a landlord, that you understand what an eviction is. And so essentially, an eviction is the removal of a tenant from the rental property. Now, an eviction could come from various reasons. It could be for non-payment of rent. It could be for lease violations. It could be because the owner wants to occupy the property. And it just depends on what the laws are in that jurisdiction. The courts will determine whether or not whether the landlord would receive a judgment. So again, the eviction is the removal of a tenant from the rental property. But here's what I want people to know. I don't want landlords or tenants to think that a landlord could just walk in and put a tenant out. It doesn't work like that. The landlord must follow specific rules and procedures that are set forth by that particular state or jurisdiction. And I break it down like that because I know that there are lots of landlords in Washington, D.C. Well, D.C. is not a state, but there are still laws in place which governs how the landlord must execute or apply for the eviction to take place. All right, so with the eviction process, usually it starts out by that landlord issuing a notice either to cure or quit, meaning that it could be, again, a violation of the lease. And so if that's the case, then the landlord would essentially give the tenant time to stop what they're doing, to pay their rent, or whatever the case is. And so there is a process. And usually when that form is issued to the tenant, it will give the tenant a certain amount of time to either correct the problem or to move out on their own. Okay. And when that doesn't happen within that time frame, so let's just take, for instance, a 30-day notice. Okay. So in situations where that notice has expired, maybe it's been 30 days. And so that landlord can then take the tenant to court. Okay. And they would have to file the necessary forms that are required by the court to go before the judge. And the case is given a date when it's going to go before the judge. In many cases, landlords have landlord and tenant attorneys to represent them. And there are landlords who are knowledgeable about the process and they may self-represent, meaning that they may not have an attorney. And that may be okay. But in any event, the matter has to go before the judge. Okay. And just depending on how quickly that can happen, that would determine how long that process takes. I know that in Washington, D.C. and in some other jurisdictions, court cases they're backed up. There's this huge backlog to evict tenants. Okay. But when the court hear the ruling, the judge will make a decision as to whether or not that landlord can evict the tenant by way of a judgment. So in this case, we don't know how this is going to unfold for the tenant, but I know that is a frightening thing to have to experience, just thinking or believing that they're going to be evicted. All right. And so the final step in the eviction process is for the court to issue a judgment for that landlord to say, hey, Mr. and Mrs. Landlord, you can move forward with the eviction process to have your tenant or tenants removed from the property. That may require a sheriff or marshal or whatever the authority is to assist that landlord with going to the property, making sure that the eviction is executed legally and safely. So usually if it's the marshal or if it's the sheriff or the police, just depending on the jurisdiction, usually law enforcement officials will go into the property to clear it out, make sure that whoever's inside understand that the property has to be vacated. They're going to verify the correct address and all of that stuff, right? And so when that happens, then the tenant is physically able to remove their things from the property, or just depending on where the property is and the laws in that jurisdiction, they could either remove all of those things right then and there, or they may have time to go back and retrieve their items. So I just wanted to get that in the way so that you have at least the basis the foundation of what an eviction is and that process. And so in this matter that I'm speaking on today, there was a Section 8 tenant who had been in the property for an extended period of time, well over 15 years. And I'm not really sure what happened, all the ins and outs, but here's what I do know. I know that this gentleman was not the head of household, meaning that the voucher was in someone else's name. So the voucher was in his mother's name. The mother was elderly. The mother passed away. Okay. And so something happened along the way where the gentleman was removed from the lease. He was removed from that Section 8 voucher. Okay. But he still lived in the rental property. He lived there as a living aid to assist his elderly mother. All right. And so when the mother passed away, he received notification that because his mother passed away, that he would have to leave the property. So the housing agency contacted the landlord to say, hey, Mr. and Mrs. Landlord, because the tenant, the head of household, is now deceased, we're going to stop payment on the voucher. And the landlord was a little confused because they couldn't understand if the son was still in the property why they would stop payment. And so this story took a turn because the son, who was in the rental property as a live-in aid, okay, the son did not understand why he was being told he had to move. He had just lost his mom. Mom died. Now he's hearing that he's going to be evicted because the agency stopped paying the landlord and he couldn't afford to pay the landlord, right? And so it's heartbreaking because the confusion, the miscommunication, I don't know who dropped the ball or why, but it was clear to me that the son did not understand why he was told he was going to have to leave. Let me break it down a little bit further. So in the Section 8 program, in housing subsidy programs, when tenants are the only people listed on the lease, and maybe they have a live-in aid, a live-in aid is only there to assist the tenant. The live-in aid income is not calculated towards the rent. So in the Section 8 program, the tenant's rent is calculated based off of their income. Okay. And so with the live-in aid, their income is excluded. Now they do have to go through the application process. They have to make sure that they're in, the policy requirement for them to legally be in the household. But because he was listed only as a live-in aid, he does not qualify to receive the voucher. If, however, he was a household member and the mother passed away, then perhaps he could have stayed in that rental property. Now, remember I said he had lived in the property for an extended period of time, right? And at whatever given time it was, he was originally on the lease. Something happened. They removed him from the lease. He moved back in as a live-in aid. He is not eligible to receive the voucher. So here it is. His mother's deceased. He's disabled. He has nowhere to go. And now he's forced with the heartbreaking heaviness of being evicted. Where's he going? He has no idea. He doesn't have any help. And I'm sure that is very scary. And here's what I want people to understand about the Section 8 program. The Section 8 program is in place to help families and participants who need housing. And in this matter, the sole occupant, the head of household, she passed away. Therefore, there is no need for the government to pay the landlord. All right. And so with this matter, I know that this gentleman is scared. He's confused. He's still grieving over the loss of his mom. I'm sharing this information because I hope to raise awareness about issues that he's facing, but not just him, but a lot of people are facing these type of problems. There are resources, there is help in the community for people like him in the time of need. And so I know that there are agencies that are rallying behind him, trying to see what type of assistance they could give him, because there's obviously a need for him to have a place to call home. And so when that happens and when these matters reach my desk, I like to talk about it, to share and to bring awareness to the community, and to just kind of fill you all in on some of the things that happen behind the scene that a lot of people are not aware of. Um, and so with the Section 8 voucher, unfortunately, this gentleman will likely not be able to keep his mother's voucher. He will be able to apply for some sort of housing program if the agency or someone can help him find a place that is taking applications where there is no wait list. That's the scary part, because he doesn't know how long that process could take. And every day that he's in that rental property, the agency is not paying the landlord. So technically, the landlord can will have to take him to court, obviously, but could hold him responsible for any money for the rent as long as he's there. And if he doesn't pay it, then he may likely be evicted. He may be put out with nowhere to go. And so we are in the fourth quarter of the year. We are getting ready to embark upon the winter season. We don't know how long that eviction process is going to take. It just depends on how many cases are already in court, how many, or if there is a backlog, right? But this gentleman, he's on the brink of losing the only place that he's called home. It's heartbreaking, it's devastating, but I wanted to bring this to the forefront of the rental community so that you can understand this man's journey. And so here's what I want you to understand for those of you who are participants, who have loved ones who are in the Section 8 program. Whenever it comes to a live-in aid, live-in aids are only there to assist. They are not part of the lease. Their income is not calculated towards the rent. All right. And in that situation, if anything happens, like it did with this head of household here, if anything happens, that live-in aid is legally not eligible to receive that voucher. Now, if the agency is able to make some sort of exception, great. But usually it does not work like that in the program. All right. And so here it is. This is a struggle for him. And a lot of people go through these struggles. And so I want to especially speak to those of you who are tenants. If you're participating in the program, understand what the rules are. The Section 8 program, Housing Choice Voucher Program, it is a federally funded and regulated program. The staff in that agency don't have an option to make an exception or to change the law. Now, I know that this is a heartbreaking story to see this disabled man possibly kicked out on the street right before the holidays, right? But they don't have an option to change the laws. They don't have, it's above their pay grade to change the federal regulation, okay? And so I want you to understand how this impacts the rental community. Because again, this is not the only story. There are others who have gone through this. There are others who will go through this because they don't tune in on Mondays to get this information as you're receiving it today, which is why I'm asking that you share it, because maybe it could prevent somebody else from going down this road and experiencing this type of journey. Okay. But let me pause because I want to get your feedback as it pertains to the eviction process. If you are a landlord, type yes in the chat box if you are familiar with the eviction process, or if you have ever had to evict somebody. Type yes in the chat box. And if you haven't, type no. All right. Because here's the thing, when it comes to eviction, I know that for landlords, and let me speak to landlords now. I know that for landlords, it is a business. And many of you, you've been following me. You know that my philosophy is very simple. If you treat it like a business, it's going to pay you like a business. If you treat it like a hobby, it's going to pay you like a hobby. When tenants are not paying rent, it is an expectation that they're either going to leave voluntarily or they're going to be evicted. There usually is no middle ground. Okay. However, in this situation, this is not a case of non payment of rent by the tenant. The head of household passed away. And so the landlord is asking that this gentleman be evicted and removed from the rental property. So if you are a landlord, you are familiar with the eviction process, or maybe you evicted somebody, let me know in the chat box. And then also, if you are a tenant, hey, thank you so much for tuning in. Hello, hello, hello. If you are a tenant, or if you know someone who is a tenant and have gone through the eviction process, you already know and understand how scary it is to be on that side of the fence, to be evicted or threatened that you're going to be evicted. And so this is a really sad case because here it is, this gentleman, he's disabled. He's kind of up in age. So I would consider him elderly. But in this matter, either if he doesn't get assistance from another agency or even that agency to get that Section 8 voucher, which honestly, like I said, I don't think that's possible. But if he doesn't do something soon, then he face a strong possibility of being evicted. And so if you are in a situation as a tenant and you get an eviction summons, you get a judgment, it is always in your best interest to work with that landlord, especially if it's for non-payment of rent. Let me just park here. Let me put a meter, put a quarter in a meter and park here. If you are a tenant and you received a judgment against you for non-payment of rent, one of the things that I always tell tenants is this. When I am teaching and training tenants on their rights and their responsibilities, I always tell them to try to work out some sort of payment agreement, payment arrangement with the landlord. Here's why. Because some landlords, if the tenant does not pay the rent that's due, landlords will report that to the credit bureaus. And an eviction, if it's reported to the credit bureaus or not, because this is public information, it could potentially prevent tenants from moving into another rental property. And so I always try to err on the side of caution, work it out if possible. But in some cases, you can't work it out. In this situation with this gentleman who's disabled, he can't work it out with the landlord to stay because he doesn't have the money to stay. The agency has stopped the payment to the landlord. So what is he left to do? Absolutely nothing. He can move. He can maybe try to find housing somewhere else, maybe get into some sort of housing subsidy program. How possible is that? How likely is that to happen right away? Those are the answers we don't know. And so that's why it is so heartbreaking for me. Hey, Dee, thank you so much for tuning in, beautiful. So let me give some tips here again for tenants. Landlords first. Understand what you can and cannot do when it comes to the eviction process. So I've already explained the eviction process. Landlords cannot just walk into the rental property and put tenants out. Landlords are required by law, by the state or that specific jurisdiction on, depending on where the property is, there are certain notices that must be issued to the tenants. Okay, there are certain forms that must be filed at the court. A court date must be provided by the judge, by the court, and the landlord will get a judgment if they're going to be able to move forward with putting that tenant out. And then that landlord can move to the physical part of contacting the marshals, the sheriff, or whatever the law enforcement agency is in that jurisdiction to physically remove the tenant from the rental property. Landlords cannot, let me just say that again. Landlords cannot, absolutely not, just walk into a rental property and put tenants out. Landlords cannot change the locks unless there's an eviction. The landlord cannot turn off the utilities if it is the requirement for the utilities to be on unless there is an eviction. Can you hear me okay? Does that make sense? Because I know that sometimes landlords don't really know, especially new landlords or landlords who are not as knowledgeable, especially for those landlords who have self-managed their property and maybe they've had a great run with renting to tenants and they never had to go through the eviction process. Then all of a sudden, 5, 10, 15, 20 years later, they find themselves in a situation where now they have to pursue the eviction process and they don't know how to do it. So please know what you can and cannot do. Okay? And so as a tenant, please also know that you have rights as well. So every Monday, I'm here 7:30 p.m. I'm sharing information because I want to help the rental community. Okay? If you have questions, that's what this time is for. Drop your questions, your comments in the chat box. Are there any questions pertaining to the information that I shared today? Are there any questions pertaining to the eviction process? If so, please drop it in the chat box for me. All right. And so let me share. I promised you that I would share my email address because I want you to contact me if you have questions, if you have comments, remarks, or observations when I'm not online. Okay. So give me 1 second. Give me 1 second. Let me pull up my email address today. And I do hope that this was helpful. I'm going to watch this case so closely because I'm always concerned. I do have a heart for people. I have a heart for situations such as this because here it is. This gentleman may potentially be evicted at no fault of his own. And it's so heartbreaking. I know that a lot of people are looking for housing everywhere. At the end of the day, everybody need a roof over their head, right? And so here it is, this gentleman, he's disabled. He doesn't have the income. He can't afford to pay the rent there. So I'm definitely watching this case so closely to see what comes out of it. And here is my email address on the screen for you. Please contact me if you have questions. Please contact me if there are any topics that you would like for me to cover in the upcoming weeks. This is what I do. I absolutely love what I do as a landlord and tenant expert. My goal is to positively impact and educate the rental community. So that's inclusive of landlords, it's inclusive of tenants and housing professionals. And so for people or companies who work with tenants and landlords, this information is also for them. All right. If you have questions, please drop it in the chat box for me. Hey, Ronnie G. Happy Monday. Thank you for tuning in. Okay, you said I just had something similar happen. The long-term tenant died. He was dead for 2 weeks before you found him. I think the nephew was trying to move in because he knew the rent was low. Wow, that is, I didn't know that. Thank you for sharing. So how did you handle that situation? Was it scary? Was it alarming? Did you know how to handle that? If you could just type yes in the chat box, because I know that I do have a lot of landlords in the program and who do watch and they know how to handle these situations. So Ronnie, were you nervous? Were you concerned? Were you scared? Or did you know how to handle that situation? All right, Doster Group, thank you so much for tuning in on the YouTube channel. You say you are a disabled vet. Your landlord has threatened to turn off the utilities and file a termination of tenancy. They've done it twice. They filed one, then withdrew it, forced you to pay the late fees in order to renew your lease in Largo, Maryland. You're in Largo, Maryland. Okay, thank you so much for tuning in. And so here's why this is important. It's important for landlords. It's important for tenants. And as a tenant, again, you do have rights. Okay. I am always concerned, especially for tenants, because I have a heart. I have a heart for people, but I also have a heart for what I do. And so even in Largo, that's Prince George's County, Maryland, even in Prince George's County, Maryland, you have rights. And I'm hoping that you have some sort of landlord and tenant attorney or advocate that can help you understand what your rights are. Please don't feel bullied, don't feel pressure because the landlord has done that. Now, in some cases, um, the courts will not require tenants to pay late fees. Now, I don't know what the situation is in PG County, but just make sure that you understand what your rights are. Thank you so much for sharing that. Ronnie G, you said, yes, you was nervous. Absolutely. And so just going back to your situation, that could be a frightening situation, especially when your tenant has passed away and here comes a family member that wants to occupy the property. Now, if they are participating in the housing program, there's a process that they must go through. Family members cannot just move into the property because someone died. They have to go through the process. They have to be qualified. They have to be approved by the agency. And if and when they are approved, the agency will pay the rent. And if not, then you could potentially have a squatter on your hands. And so, Ronnie G, I hope that it worked out for you. I hope that you don't have a squatter. You said he wanted to give me money for another month to move out the belongings. If I took that money, I was told that it's the same as having a lease. He would have moved in at a low rent amount. Absolutely. And so if you are accepting money, if you're accepting payment for rent, then you are agreeing to allow them to remain in the property. I think I remember this situation, Ronnie G. So I hope that you worked it out with the family member, the nephew who was trying to move in. Hopefully they vacated the property because it's a lot easier to deal with it on the front end versus the nephew, the family moving in, paying rent or not, because sometimes, let's just be honest, sometimes people will move in and won't pay at all. And so the fact that at least they were honest and decent enough to offer you rent, I commend them for that. But here's the thing, sometimes people don't know, right? Maybe he didn't know that he couldn't just move in and pay whatever the rent was. Sometimes people honestly don't know. Sometimes they do, but sometimes they don't. You work with him, you gave him time to move the things out. In the end, only thing he moved out was a TV. So that's what made me think he was really trying to move in. Absolutely. If all he took was a TV, that's all he was concerned about, was moving into a property and pay low rent or no rent. But now here's the thing. Let's just say in this situation, he paid you, right? He paid for 1 month. You allowed him to stay. And then after that, he paid nothing else. Can you imagine how upsetting that is? How frustrating that could have been for you? Because you would have still had to go through the process to take him to court. So I hope that it did work out for you. It doesn't always work out for everybody. And so I love to hear these type of stories. I love to bring awareness to the rental community. That's why I do what I do. Listen, my time is up. I thank you for yours. I hope that you found some sort of value in this. Please, if you have not already, subscribe to my YouTube channel. Please go over to YouTube. Please find me. You can find me, Karissa Spann at Landlord Lyfe on YouTube. Smash that subscribe button so that you'll know when I am live and online. I do have some, I have some information I want to share with you all next week, and I'm super excited about it. Listen, I thank you so much for your time. Thank you for showing up Facebook. Thank you for showing up on LinkedIn. Thank you for showing up on YouTube. I'm Karissa Spann, the landlord and tenant expert. If there are no other questions, I look forward to seeing you all next week. And again, my email address is at the bottom of the screen there. Please feel free to email me. Okay, email me any information that you would like for me to cover in the upcoming weeks. I will gladly do so. All right. Last question here. The fees were billed to me as rent and charge interest. I'll be emailing you soon. Absolutely. Please do. info@landlordlife.com, right there. That's where you can find me. You can find me here next week, same platform. I'm on Facebook, I'm on YouTube, and I am on LinkedIn. I'll see you all next week.